The Windscale fire, the first public nuclear disaster.
When World War II was over, 2 Japanese cities had been vaporized and warfare had suddenly, irrevocably changed. A second race to be the next superpower to build the bomb had just begun. Allies America and Britain shared critical nuclear secrets during the war, but almost immediately after the Axis was destroyed, that partnership went up in smoke. And so, less than a year after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Britain resolved to prove to the Americans that she too could summon inhumane heat from lumps of radioactive metal.
Wait, why did they fall out? I'm assuming he's going to explain that. Why did they fall out? I wasn't aware that they fell out. I thought we were quite, important in the designing and making of it, no?
Indeed, they wanted hundreds of fat mans and little boys in just 10 years' time. But haste and inexperience would cost Britain dearly. That is, when the public actually
the rush to
found
build
out
them
what had
when
happened.
little was known about nuclear
Before
reactors.
Fukushima, before Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island, a mad rush to catch up with American nuclear dominance would lead to the very first public nuclear disaster. A flaming pile of uranium that, thanks to government cover-ups, would contaminate the conversation to this very day. This is why one of Britain's first 2 large-scale nuclear reactors burned down. This is the true story of the Windscale fire.
I haven't heard about this, and I live here, so.
The accident occurred here at the 3 Mile Island nuclear power plant.
Why had the power to drop that? No, I wouldn't.
A critical mass of plutonium-239 weighs about as much as a 10-kilogram dumbbell, and because of its density, it would fit in your hand. A critical sphere of uranium-235 would need some serious strength to display. Plutonium is denser, more fissile, and produces more neutrons than uranium, therefore making it the ideal nuclear weapons material. Anything more than trace plutonium has to be made by man, but post-World War II Britain wasn't in a position to pay for uranium enrichment plants that they...
We've been broke ever since. We've been broke ever since. It also weirds me out, how the most destructive thing that we've ever made is just a silver ball, like a massive ball bearing. It weirds me out. It just looks so innocent, but it's so deadly. You know what I mean?
It calculated would cost 10 times as much. And so, with Winston Churchill himself breathing down their necks, British scientists were tasked with building nuclear and thermonuclear bombs from scratch. If they could quickly produce a big enough bang, maybe the Americans would rekindle their special relationship. And so, just 5 years after the Americans forced the Japanese to surrender, 2 nuclear reactors were operational near the village of Seascale, Cumberland. The Windscale piles 1 and 2 were so named for their design, literally piles of graphite blocks, like Chicago Pile 1, the first nuclear reactor to go critical in America in 1942. But unlike any of the machines producing electricity today, not a watt was generated at the Windscale piles. They existed purely to transmute uranium fuel into plutonium for weapons. Also unlike today's reactors, they were dangerously ad hoc.
Well, hold up. How that seemed quite close to civilization. Surely your first foray into making devastating weapons or a place to turn it into the really deadly kind, you should probably... It's not like we don't have a lot of space and fields. I feel like you should be a bit further away from everybody, no? That on the map, look, that looks so close to where people would just be living their day to day.
Windscale piles 1 and 2 were absolutely enormous 2 million kilogram graphite cores. Drilled into these black as carbon monoliths were 3,440 fuel channels, where up to 180,000 kilograms of uranium fuel in finned cartridges were pushed in by hand with metal rods.
By hand?
These would fall out the back of the reactor and into a water trough after fissioning. At least, that was the plan. Instead of cooling the fuel with water, giant fans blew air through the channels to carry heat away from fission reactions and finally up and out a distinctive 120-meter-tall chimney. Filters at the very top of the chimney were installed later, at great expense, to catch any potential releases from the reactor. In theory, thousands of kilograms of uranium would capture neutrons and produce plutonium, which would then be sent off-site for chemical separation and weapon construction.
That felt far too basic. Now, I don't know enough about this, but that feels far too basic to be safe.
Just 2 years after Pile 1 went critical, the UK conducted its first nuclear weapons test in Australia. This speed, however, was achieved at a
Why
premium.
Australia?
In practice, blowing gale force winds over high surface area cartridges often flung the fuel beyond the water channel entirely. There, cartridges damaged by the impact released radioactive particles up and out the chimney. This was happening for the entire operation of the piles. Not only were cartridges missing the cooling channel, they were getting stuck and breaking inside the reactors.
That's the most British
in fact,
thing I've
it
ever
soon
heard.
just became part of the job to suit up in Cumberland's cumbersome air suits to go and scoop the uranium fuel in the chimney ducts back into the water. As this BBC documentary from 1990, Our Reactor is on Fire, points out, it was also part of the job to tell the scientists finding widespread but not yet dangerous contamination across the English countryside to mind their own business.
Jake?
Right, I'm sorry. So once they realised that pushing them in manually often missed the thing, damaged them, and then started leaking radiation, instead of just saying, hey, let's hold off, let's just put some money into, like, just changing it up a bit, make it a bit more safe, add some safeguards, maybe make the cooling system a bit wider, or the way we put it in a bit more efficient. No, you're going to send people in there to move them by hand. That is crazy. World War II, yeah, but this is after we saw the devastation, Will. So you saw the devastation of two, major cities in Japan. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's nuts to me.
Simon and Leslie were told to hand back their Geiger counters and mind their own business.
The other more
Good day, governors. Oh, yeah, what are you reading? Oh, yes, yeah, we're polluting the air and we're destroying the landscape. It's not safe for you to be here, and we'd appreciate you not finding out what we're doing. Thank you very much. See you later. That's effectively what that's gone down.
Was invisible. Neutrons in the core weren't just fissioning uranium, they were actively changing the graphite moderator the giant blocks were made of. Over time, they would accumulate what the Americans said was Wigner energy. This energy would build up as the reactors ran and would, without warning, release itself as a huge amount of heat. This, combined with the fissioning uranium, had the potential to bring the reactor temperature far beyond specifications and risked setting everything, even the fairly heat-resistant graphite, on fire. Do not let the graphite catch fire, the Americans had told the British scientists. And so, like kicking cans of uranium back into the water, another ad hoc routine was to try and release the Wigner energy in the graphite before it gathered too much. There was no manual or handbook for this. The 9th release set Windscale on fire.
Right, just before he adds anything else to that, like, for it to hit those temperatures, that's probably continued use, right? But we'll just stop for a minute. Like, maybe like take a couple of weeks off. Would it cool down? I don't know. I actually don't know how it works. Like, that feels to me, just stop for a sec. Let's chill. Let's not keep pumping it in there. When the people that made the bomb and were quite happy to use it are saying that's not safe, I think at that point, surely you should just take a minute to think. Why would you carry on?
Look at any solid close enough, and you will find an arrangement of atoms. Those atoms are bonded together, and it takes some amount of energy to separate them. Amorphous solids don't have the same orderly structure that crystalline solids do, and therefore aren't as structurally sound, but it takes energy to move their atoms around nonetheless. If supplied by high-energy neutrons, that energy can bounce atoms around into unstable positions that they don't want to be in. A single energetic neutron can create 900 atomic displacements when hitting graphite.
Is that effectively like when someone gets irradiated, like their skin falls off and everything, like it like damages DNA, like moves it out of like structure? Is that effectively kind of the same thing? I know he's talking about like solids. You know what I mean?
Resulting urge for these so-called interstitial atoms to return to their former positions is Wigner energy, named after U.S. physicist Eugene Wigner, and it can accumulate in any solid, and sometimes a lot of it. Up to 2.7 kilojoules per gram in graphite, which starts to approach the burning potential of wood and coal. With the special relationship with the United States over, Wigner energy was basically unknown to the engineers of the Windscale pilots. As a result, the thermocouples that kept track of the heating in the cores weren't designed to detect it. Energy could build up anywhere in these gigantic blocks, but there were only 66 sensors for 62,000 cubic feet of graphite. Another brute force solution was implemented.
So it was just not large enough to handle the load that we were putting on it. Some of this is going to go over my head. I'm definitely not well versed in this, but effectively, what we had wasn't designed to handle the output we wanted from it. Is kind of what I'm getting. We just kept like hammering something that was just like not built for it. Well, there was also fear the USSR was developing nukes and the US wasn't sharing. The UK saw it imperative to have their own deterrents. I can see that. I suppose it's like a desperation play. And also this special relationship. I swear you hear about it every like year or two. That it's ended, then it started. The UK and America are in the longest toxic relationship that you've ever seen. We've broke up and we got back together more times than you would ever believe, it seems.
Intentionally raise the temperature of the core beyond specifications, get all the displaced atoms in the graphite to wiggle themselves back into position and release their heat. This core annealing process was more art than science, but Churchill needed his bombs. In the October of 1957, technicians at Windscale Pile 1 were preparing to anneal the core for a 9th time. The graphite was supposed to be exercised every 40,000 megawatt days of operation.
Right.
But on this day, it contained 100% more energy than during the last atomic massage. An accident was literally waiting to happen.
Why would you leave it that long? Surely you should be checking that after every use.
Unrelenting pressure to produce plutonium and other isotopes at Windscale had created conditions that scientists knew were dangerous, but the operators kept calm and carried on. Cartridge cooling fins were reduced to increase the heat of the fuel. Instrumentation was inaccurate. The core's graphite now had hot spots of unreleased Wigner energy even after annealing.
So it's just ready to go
James
at any point.
Mahaffey's atomic accidents makes what happened next seem obvious. Quote, "The Windscale piles were operating in emergency mode, at the highest possible power level, using flammable metallic uranium fuel and flammable lithium magnesium in piles of flammable graphite with gale force air blowing through them."
None of that sounds nice.
Monday, October 7th. Reactor operators intentionally increased the heat production in the core of Pile 1, without air cooling, to initiate the 9th Wigner release. They didn't get the expected wave of heat, however, except in a single fuel channel, and so the next morning, the physicist on duty, nearly passing out with the flu, tried again. The temperature of the core rose as expected. Sick physicists or not, plutonium production was ready to crack on. But on the ensuing Thursday the 10th, one thermocouple had to be wrong. It said that the core temperature was rising, and it wasn't stopping. Soon the core was at twice its operating temperature.
So they just pushed
Worse
it and
yet,
pushed it.
the filters in Pile 1's chimney were now detecting maxed out radiation rates.
Oh, brilliant.
The reactor's heart had to be on fire, and it had been for 2 whole days. But just to make sure, a team went to the side of the reactor where fuel was loaded and removed observation.
Wait, sorry. A worker pulled out the plug in 2053 and looked in the hole. Normally, it would take a flashlight to illuminate the blackest carbon fuel channels to see what was inside, but in this case, a bright red glare greeted them. God, that's like... That would have been a terrifying sight. I feel like having a plug just to look in it feels like the most British thing. Like, so nonchalant about something that is just definitely going to kill you.
Plugs to look inside. The fuel channels were glowing red. Unsure what to do next, on Thursday afternoon, technicians tried to push the fuel cartridges out of the reactor with scaffolding poles, but they wouldn't budge. When they pulled the poles back out, the ends of them were glowing and dripping with uranium.
Oh.
In the 1990 BBC documentary, Tom Toohey, the reactor manager who would go on to be the unsung hero at Windscale, describes the phone call he got next.
I got a phone call saying, Pile 1 is on fire. And I said, good God, you don't mean the core? He said, yes. Can you come in? I said, yes.
The only built-in way to cool the reactor now was with the giant fans.
Do you know what, though? Having, like... I know it's his job, but still, to be in that line of work, receiving a call saying, yo, the reactor's on fire, and just being like, yeah, I'm coming. The balls that you have to hear that, you know, something as destructive as they're aware it could get, and you're just about to just go in there and fix it. Like, again, I know that's his job, but that is like a crazy level of bravery, surely.
So they were turned on. If there was a fire in the core, this would only make things worse, fanning the flames and blasting any radioactive particles from metal vapors across Cumberland. And that's exactly what happened. In the early hours of that Friday, the core was now hot enough to be considered a nuclear meltdown. Radioactive elements produced during fission could now boil out of cracked cartridges and be carried away by the fans. Tui had tried to pump carbon dioxide into Pile 1 to displace the oxygen to no avail, and soon yellow jets of flame were shooting out the front of the reactor, and jets of blue flame were shooting out the back. If those flames were allowed to lick the concrete walls of the building for too long, the entire building could collapse. At the same time, the fire was coating the unknown citizens of Seascale in radioactive fallout. The most consequential and dangerous decision made at Windscale Pile 1 happened 25 minutes after the meltdown.
There was another one?
Plant manager Tui wanted to flood the core with water. At these temperatures, water in contact with hot metal can oxidize and produce explosive hydrogen gas. It was 30 years before Chernobyl, but a similar explosion would be possible. Nevertheless, hoses were hooked up, the fans unintentionally feeding the fire were finally shut off, and Tui told everyone except the chief engineer to evacuate the building.
Right, I'm sorry as well. I know I'm pausing a lot of just pure disbelief, but I mean, I know this is what, the 50s, but they must, fanning a fire tends to just make, I mean, this whole reason you're going to make a campfire, on an ember, you're fueling the fire. Well, how was that ever an idea? It's on fire. Let's put the fans on. This feels like a lot of common sense. Surely they knew that back then. I mean, it was like a survival tactic. I know it's probably a little bit more in depth than that, but it's like a rule of thumb. I mean, if something's on fire, I probably wouldn't be putting. I don't know. It's weird.
Thankfully, the desperate plan worked, and the inferno inside of the reactor was soon gasping for breath. Tom Tui stayed personally to inspect the massive graphite cube until the fire had died, receiving a large dose of radiation as he did so. But he wasn't the only one.
Ooh.
Like 3 Mile Island in America
Conspiracy?
22 years later, what happened at Windscale would be made significantly worse by the public relations surrounding it, or lack thereof. News of the active plant emergency, like the independent discovery of widespread contamination years before, was immediately censored. In fact, the news only got out because a housewife at a grocery store heard that some Windscale workers had been sent home because of a fire and went home to tell her newspaper
they tried to
editor
cover
husband.
it up.
The disconnect between what was happening and what the public thought was happening was so bad that the first headlines from reporters were already declaring Seascale a death trap. Can you really blame a village of farmers for being scared when PPE-covered G-men were gaslighting them about smoke they've never seen before, clearly rising from a 400-foot-tall tower looming like Sauron in the distance?
No, if I know that there's a nuclear plant, I mean, you would have had the newspapers again, 10 years prior, these bombs have devastated cities. I mean, if you know that there's nuclear energy going on and you see flames coming out the top, which is something it didn't do, I mean, I'm going to be panicked. I'm going to call it a death village. I'm going to think the worst.
Thankfully, the government would quickly walk the right walk, even if they weren't talking the right talk. Readings around Windscale indicated that radioactive iodine-131 was the chief contaminant after the fire, an element that is taken up by the human thyroid if ingested, a very radiosensitive organ, especially in children. And so the government paid for all of the milk from all of the cows grazing on iodine-dusted grass and destroyed it. It was poured into ditches and reportedly the sea for the next month. After a year, any iodine was gone, owing to its very short half-life of just 8 days. The British government was clumsily navigating the first nuclear disaster to affect the public, but, quote, the measures adopted by those responsible for the health and safety of the population in and around Windscale were essentially right, end quote. Essentially right or not, it's not surprising that the legacy of Windscale is still one of immense distrust. Harold Macmillan, the Prime Minister of Britain at the time, was trying to get enough plutonium to impress the Americans. If Uncle Sam found out that the UK caused a public health emergency in a rush to do so, the US might simply ghost what little remaining relationship there was.
I mean, that's effectively what they did, though. They rushed it, tried to overproduce it, so that it's almost like a little child, like going to their dad or something, just be like, oh, look what I made, or look what I've done, of something they're interested in. just to try and please them. Do you know what I mean? It's effectively what it is, and just like any amount of anything that should definitely not be handled by children, effectively that's how we acted. Like, whether the health and safety was right or wrong, you get one shot at trust, I think. And if your first time ends like this, I mean, there's no... Take it, because at the end of the day, you can't be trusted. I mean, their reaction would be justified. You'd have to work on it and then put the graft in to bring that trust back up. It's not owed just because of this special relationship. Do you know what I mean?
And so, Minister Macmillan, quote, covered it up, plain and simple. News was censored and or dismissed, and the full report of the accident, which was available just 2 weeks after the fire, wouldn't be released in full, unredacted form for over 30 years. Blame for the conflagration was placed on the Windscale operators, and the residents of Cumberland were left in the dark about potential health effects for decades.
Well, they blamed the operators, the people that are there that managed to solve the problem in a thing that was funded, designed by probably not them, incorrectly, that had hazards from day one. See, that's such a cop-out. It's always blame the people on the ground, not the people that enacted any real noticeable thing that would have affected day to day. You can have someone operating it, but if the car has a bad engine, it's going to break down. It's not the driver at that point, it's the car.
Every scary statistic you've ever heard about the health consequences of a nuclear disaster are based on a simple and, in my opinion, fundamentally flawed calculation. It's called collective dose, and it's been used from Windscale to Fukushima like this. To estimate the number of negative health outcomes, like cancer, that are likely to develop after a disaster, the internationally accepted practice is to take the number of people affected and multiply it by the average dose received by that population. This gives you a new value in person-sieverts. You then multiply this number by an accepted risk coefficient based on the linear no-threshold theory to get the number of predicted fatal cancers. This simple multiplication gives you the disturbing numbers you've seen for Chernobyl.
Do you know what? This is going to wind me up, isn't it? Finding out how many people have actually had their lives absolutely ruined from nothing in their control. This is going to wind me up when he says it, isn't it? Yeah, I think that's the problem though, Ansel. They weren't worried about public trust. They just weren't. I think, but that's like the large thing is you're trying to impress this big superpower of the world. I mean, you impress your people. If you get this right, I mean, energy-wise, it can be huge. But there's probably a reason why we're so far behind now is because we're so tentative because there is not a lot of public trust. Probably stems from a lot of this. We're getting better now, but you never trust. Oh, yeah.
4,000 fatal cancers is the most common figure. Collective dose was used to do the same after Windscale. Some sources say 100 fatal cancers from iodine-131 exposure. Others say more than twice that. But this math only works if linear no-threshold theory is true. I have partly staked my reputation on it not being so. This is a study of thyroid cancer incidence in children exposed to the iodine-131 that made it through the filters at Windscale. If collective dose should find anything, it should be here, in the most vulnerable population dosed with the most potent contaminant.
Yeah.
Indeed, the study points out that earlier studies have said, given the calculated person-sieverts, around 60 childhood cancers may develop. However, when this study actually compared high exposure and zero exposure populations in Britain, it didn't even find a single % of cancer incidence difference. Why? Quote, perhaps one of the more likely explanations for the absence of excess cases of thyroid cancer is that a calculation of case numbers based upon nominal risk coefficients applied to collective doses does not produce realistic estimates of numbers of radiation-related cases of cancer. The assumptions underlying such a calculation do not have firm evidential foundations, and estimates derived in this way are spurious. End quote.
So basically, it's just a bunch of nonsense and a way of figuring it out, but in a flawed system. Some of that went over my head. I'm going to keep it a stack on that one, but it's effectively a risk assessment that's flawed fundamentally on how it figures it out, and it's just a lot of guesswork.
The scientific consensus today is that there were no long-term health effects associated with the Windscale fire. No excess thyroid cancers, No cancers in children. No health effects consistent with iodine exposure.
So they
no
were fine.
effect on the mortality of workers who got the fire under control. No effect on their health in general. No effect
That's hard to believe.
on anybody.
That's hard to believe.
The Windscale fire was the first nuclear accident in history to directly affect the public. As such, it casts a long shadow on the nuclear industry. But make no mistake, Britain's Chernobyl, this was not. The Windscale reactors were purely military operations ran at a breakneck pace for politically necessary plutonium with obvious operational and design faults. No nuclear reactors for power production today are designed like those fated piles. And as James Mahaffey points out, Windscale was rightly and immediately shut down, and no open-loop air-cooled reactors were ever built anywhere again.
Oh, at least we can be used as a warning sign. Don't make them with big fans.
Today, the Windscale piles are still there, sealed shut with thousands of fuel cartridges and thousands of kilograms of uranium inside. Decommissioning of the site continues, and will continue, through at least the 2040s.
Can they not reuse
Despite the disaster,
uranium?
And perhaps thanks to its cover-up, less than a month after the Windscale fire, the United Kingdom had enough plutonium to detonate a two-stage 1.8 megaton thermonuclear device over Christmas Island in the South Pacific. The Americans finally took them seriously and granted the UK the use of the Nevada test site,
we
where
pleased
it would
Daddy, didn't we?
detonate another 24 nuclear bombs under the crater-covered Earth. Tom, too.
Oh, you did so well. Well done for creating such a destructive fucking thing. Great. Well done, mate. Yeah, appreciate it, Father. Yeah, I don't worry. Give me about like 5 more years. I'll have so many bigger bombs for you. Shut up.
The plant manager who finally extinguished Windscale and received more radiation than anyone while doing so, died in his sleep in 2008.
So he was fine.
He was 90 years old.
Even
Britain
with that
has
much
never
radiation.
officially recognized his efforts. Until next time.
That's crazy. How? I'm so confused. Like, how has nobody got like affected? It's not Florida's intentional. True. I guess it looks better for the news. But how has nobody got affected from that? It did look quite close to the population. They weren't concerned about public trust and really weren't all that concerned about nuclear energy generation. From them, the cost analysis was acceptable. Let me do this. Acceptable casualties from radiation release versus not having a deterrent, and the USSR dropping a megaton level bomb on London. You have to remember, Windscale was in 57. The USSR tested their first hydrogen bomb in 55. So the fear was massive. And don't get me wrong, I see it from like a defense standpoint, but like it's short-sighted though. Like to rush and be ill prepared, it sets you back. Because then the legislation to actually go through and then get another thing going and another thing going, surely it will be public trust eventually. I mean, in the short term, you might be able to get a few, but if you really wanted to experiment or do anything more, if nobody trusts you worldwide or globally, or even your people, you're going to have protests. It's going to delay it, no? Well, I suppose it didn't. Well, it seemed to be all right, but I don't know. I think there's a way of doing it tastefully, because then you might even have a mass adoption of hey, yeah, we want more nuclear power plants, which allows you more research and energy to power the country, whilst having it. But what did you say to me, Kat, the other day? We've got the record for the longest in development power plant, nuclear power plant, right? Which is crazy. But there's evidently still some stumbling blocks there, and some old habits die hard mentality of, don't like it. But yeah, that was a cool one. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I know nearly as much as some people that watch this stuff, and definitely not this guy, but I really enjoyed that. But that is our first video on this channel. This is going to be very much a history, conspiracy, myth, maybe like dark myth. I don't know. We'll see. But it's going to be a bit more of a mature angle. I do have another channel which is a bit more lighthearted. That's just Sipsy Reacts. So if you want to check that out. But I appreciate you. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.